Hello, this is Fugly here again. Um, so let's have a talk about two things today. One thing is going to be a discussion about um, stratification as it relates to capital and labor and some of the issues in the USA. Um, how the suing of Elon Musk by Tesla Motors is going to be a great thing for democracy in the USA, and also the idea of symbolism and how that can help the Middle East and whatever's going on there. So let's start off with a capital versus labor. So in a sort of, we'll call it a 20th century, 21st century type of idea, it's not really a new thing, but in a post-Marxist discussion, it's not really a Marxist discussion, but Marxist language will be used, okay? So, capital versus labor, okay? Or the petit bourgeois versus the proletariat and the lumpen proletariat. So, in a capitalist society, or very very similar, and we're talking about economically. The division is between capital or business and labor or the workers. Proletariat was the Marxist word for worker, and lumpenproletariat was a word for those who were denied even the servitude of being a member of the proletariat. So, in that situation, that type of way of looking at things, capital owns what's called the means of production. So they have the money, they have the stuff, they have the factories and the businesses and things like that, the shares in the companies or whatever else. Or in the case of Larry Flink, the weird Aladdin software that's can crash the stock market. And so the proletariat, being the ordinary civilian worker, is almost left up to the whims of the market and capital's positioning of its resources in whatever locations are to make a work available or not available to them. And they go and they seek employment and wages from that, and the lumpen proletariat are denied even that. So stratification amongst the proletariat is a sociological idea. The word stratification does not have a Marxist origin. We're not supporting Marxism by saying this. We're just saying that that's where the language came from. And so within the proletariat or the working class, you can have demographic subdivisions as well. So, um, um, so based on people's race, gender, country of origin, age, for example, qualifications that they may or may not have, work experience, so on and so forth, and whether or not or personality or something like that, and all those types of variables might influence their ability to acquire a job and whether or not that job is sufficient for meeting their needs. That is one way of looking at things. Another way of looking at things is that capital, by determining where the resources are allocated, might decide to allocate resources to people based on those demographics for the purposes of stratifying the economy in such a manner that there are subdivisions within the proletariat that involve discrimination. An example of that is that when it comes to the societies that the imperialist societies that became the colonial empire, so we can't say that these features are an enduring part of Australian society because it really is after Captain Cook type of thing. Okay, but so we'll go back to these ideas originate in Europe basically, and America's got them as well, and America's a pretty good example to talk about. Okay, the America is an example of a country that that built its economy based on slavery, which is the ability to generate maximum profits with reduced labor costs. So a large cost for a business is the wages of the employees. And so by starting their economy off with slavery, they maximize profits quite readily, and were able to build their empire accordingly. South Africa did something similar with the discrimination that occurred during apartheid era. Australia has a stolen wages history as well, and it is of course the case that the free labour of the serfs during the feudal period is an example of that also. And moreover, since the Code of Hammurabi, in the European and Mesopotamian context, you have the issue of 6,000 years of free labour by women. Free labour being, in that case, domestic servitude. And so, in the 20th century, certain things happened, such as the women's rights movement, where they weren't expected to do domestic servitude and they were allowed to go into the workforce and join the proletariat as paid employees. They experienced successive types of discrimination where they didn't get the same wages as the men, and it's still an issue that's ongoing today for some sectors of the economy, where women aren't paid the same as men. It was also the case when they entered slavery in the United States of America for black Americans, that those people were not paid the same wages as white workers. And those are examples of stratification within the proletariat induced by capital's profit-driven motive. So when those black and female workers, for example, went into the economy as proletariat workers during that time period, capital had an interesting reaction. It had the opportunity to engage in propaganda that favoured those people working, but also had the opportunity to engage in propaganda that didn't. And so what happened is there was a cultural reaction, sometimes associated with the 1950s conformity movement in the USA, where where the reiteration of gender roles and fear of anything that challenged it, such as homosexuality or drag queens, became kind of a thing. And so the reaction was that married women weren't allowed to work. Unmarried women were, and they were to be paid less than men. And so there was a reaction to that again. Okay, so the push to have equal pay for equal work amongst all sectors of the economy continues to be an issue. Although equal opportunity in employment legislation occurs in many Anglophone societies, including Australia, there is the issue of whether or not that's been enforced and fairly applied. It's also the issue of whether or not it applies to migrant workers. And migrant workers is the part that the USA needs to listen to the most right now. Okay, discrimination on Haitians, for example, because they're brown, is secondary to discrimination on the basis that when they go fruit picking, they're going to get paid cash in hand and get less than an American worker. Okay? Although specific opinions and personal opinions between each capitalist entrepreneur is likely to vary considerably, it is the case that they are part of a superstructure called the economy, whereby having a profit motive is a central feature of the corporate and capitalist dynamic. And so as a consequence of that, reduced labour costs continues to be an issue. And so when a worker is undocumented and travels across the border and seeks employment, cash in hand as a fruit picker or cleaner or factory hand or whatever it might be, usually some kind of shit-kicking job where they're probably not going to get a lot of money, even if they were paid properly, they might get cash in hand less than the American worker in question. And so capital benefits from the reduced labour costs associated with discrimination against migrants and weak industrial laws that favour paying higher wages to local workers means that capital benefits from undocumented migrants going into the USA and taking your jobs. So, on the basis of that argument, the screwing up of South American economies under NAFTA comes back into the foreground, as well as the history of the CIA and other groups influencing South American societies, such as in the example of Augustus Pinochet being installed in Chile by the CIA, as it turns out. What you'll probably find is that a fascist or fascist-like dictator, so Trump or Maduro, for example, crops up after there's been a history of migrants crossing the border, okay, into that country because their country has been screwed over somehow and they're better off crossing the border and going somewhere else. And they, undocumented or documented, were engaging in reduced labour costs by being underpaid and in their employment. Capital was benefiting and the local workers were upset because they were not getting employment and they were being told and could see the migrants took their jobs, okay? So the migrants took their jobs, okay? So anyone with basic observation at this point can go, well, it's not really the migrants' fault, is it? If there's these super corporations and government structures and militaries and whatever the heck else screwing over their economies, and what else are they going to do, right? Right? So, but the propaganda that comes from capital turns around and says, it's the migrants' fault. They're trying to rip you off. They're economic migrants, right? Okay? So, but not really. They're not. They're also political and social migrants and refugees in the sense of they're economic refugees as well, because the economy where they came from is obviously not in a very good position here. They even need to move to a different country just to deal with that. So the rhetoric that comes from capital is to blame the strata or substrata within the proletariat for what capital has done. So capital is renowned for DAVO, okay, or denial and reversal of victim and offender. And so that domestic violence tactic by capital is expressed in years of propaganda coming from the different groups that appeal to either the sort of trade union-like sentiment of equal pay for equal work, or they took your jobs, they're the bad guy, sort of alt-right pipeline type logic. And as a consequence of that, that sort of cults that form around your corporate leaders or hierarchies come into the foreground in a situation where you've got a long-term language problem in the States in particular. It's not such a big deal in other countries, but this is something that's been noticed about the USA that's quite concerning. How much are you worth? Consider that statement. How much are you worth? Now, that phrase is not uttered in Australia. Okay, people don't ask that in Australia. How much is your worth? What's your net worth? Okay, it's not a phrase that you'll find in Australia. Like, people don't talk like that. But when the US media talks about rich people in particular, how much are they worth? What's their net worth? It's like, why are you using that language for? A person's worthiness is not based on their income. A person's worthiness is based on, well, they have natural enduring rights, don't they? It even says so in the US Constitution. Why are you talking like that, USA? Why does the USA talk like that? They are a country that's proud of the fact that their constitution has a Bill of Rights. Even the Australian constitution doesn't. Okay, there are a couple of things in there that will qualify as rights. Okay, and a couple of things that will qualify as discrimination as well. Nonetheless, the USA is proud of having a Bill of Rights as part of its constitution, including amendments to which they're fabulously quoting all the time, to the point where other countries actually know what they are. So they're very big on that. And yet, they afford to capital this idea of how much is it worth? Yeah. Okay. So Elon Musk is worth that much money, is he? Or Jeff Bezos, or whoever it might be. You know, Donald Trump even. And it's like, well, actually, sorry, but if you're staging fascist coups and you're deporting US citizens and putting kids in detention centers, you're not worth a lot, mate, even if you've got billions of dollars. Like, you know, if you talk about moral worth, isn't that based on your conduct? Okay, a little bit confused by that one. So this sort of language, of a person's value being an economic concept, seems to be an American thing. Amazingly, haven't really seen it in other places. They might do it in other places, but haven't actually seen it there. And I don't know why the Yanks are doing that. And so that, however, raises an interesting question about how dark matter came to, or dark matter, or the dark enlightenment people came to be about. Because one of their arguments wasn't it, richer people are smarter than poorer people? And poorer people expanded and need to be turned to biodiesel or something like that. It's like, well, actually, you're placing value on smartness, right? Which, by the way, is useful. There's nothing wrong with it. It's more the point that it's not the only thing that people can contribute to society. And it's often a poorly understood concept anyway. And in that case, it's completely misunderstood, because it's assuming that income is associated with intelligence, which it's not. There's a lot of people who are very smart, who are dead set fucking poor. Heck, you might have been looking at one of them right now. And so the people who are doing that seem to have done that a few steps of logic after how much you're worth. That argument, how much you're worth, they say in the USA, and it's like, you're worth a lot because you've got a lot of money. It's like, you're just saying that capital is worth more than labour. You just argue that the aristocracy, or the wannabe aristocracy called the petit bourgeois, has more value than the people that generate their wealth. You just said that the liege lord has more value than the serf. Okay, are you American or not? Like, aren't you supposed to be no kings? Well, why do you talk like that for? So that sort of language thing is kind of, whoa, America, what are you doing? And so, saying things like that Musk, Bezos, Peter Thiel, whoever they might be, are richer and therefore more powerful is or they must be a genius or something like that, is crap. And so that there was an example of Labour flinging the shit right back at the petit bourgeois, right, or capital, because this is the option that gets given to the proletariat. Remember the lumpen proletariat? You can fling shit at them and say, oh, they're all a bunch of junkies and they're kind of worthless and they did it to themselves, Yeah, but what if that person has a disability and they didn't choose it? Okay, thank you, Labour. Okay, yeah, okay, right, okay. Blah, blah, blah. So anyway, what you'll find with the hard right is the hard right contains the junkies. They're people who are the truly drug fuck ones become the neo-Nazis. They're the ones that don't want to listen to Labor. They don't want to admit that capital did propaganda to them and diddled them of their worldview and their right to fight back properly. That they were given religious, political, and economic propaganda to fling shit at other members of the proletariat or the lumpen proletariat instead of flinging it back at the petit bourgeois. And so, as a consequence of that, that sort of dynamic plays out where people would argue that some members of the lumpen proletariat and the proletariat come from the democratic, alt-right, fascistic, neo-Nazi type of language, where they are imprinted with the imperial mindset, which means they act as jackies or sellouts for capital. Right? So, when that sort of thing happens, you'll probably find that the centre-right or conservatives and the left-wing are a united front. Okay? They don't like Hitler. They don't like Mussolini. They don't like too much deregulation of corporations. They don't like too much aggressive, fascistic, militaristic bullshit. They just vary in their opinions on what social and economic policy should be the regulations for that particular time and place and those particular set of social and economic circumstances. And so there's that. It cannot automatically be assumed that all of the right wing hates human rights, but it can be assumed that totalitarians and fascists don't like human rights, and typically they're embarrassed individuals who should have been fruit pickers but couldn't get a job because capital was benefiting from the slavery of migrants, and so they became racist and deflected upon them. They've got the insider-outsider mentality, and so they deflect, just like capital taught them to, just like Christianity taught them to, just like Wicca taught them to, just like Masonry taught them to, just like Judaism taught them to, just like Islam taught them to, and so on and so forth. Because religions in that particular context become propaganda machines to foster a style of thinking that supports capital. Religion exists to serve capital. Racism and prejudice and sexism exist to serve capital. Remember, you exist to serve capital. So, on that subject, let's look at symbolism. Okay, then the next topic. Symbolism. We'll go into a different topic of two different religions, Islam and Judaism. Okay, now, even though the battleground for all the confusing stuff that happens in the Middle East is a largely corporate affair involving numerous international actors over the course of 80 plus years, if not more, could go even back to the Crusades even, you'll probably find that the propaganda of religion has been used by multiple nation states to engage in propaganda, say that Islam is terrorist and there's a great bureaucracy or something like that, when in actuality is that corporate situation. It's capital using religion as a means of propaganda and warfare. So when it comes to cultural myopia, which is the idea that a person's cultural worldview can function as a projection onto a situation that may not be the truth, and guess what? Maybe that's what's going on right now too. However, we can apply it to this concept. Okay, the symbol of the crescent moon and the five-pointed star. A five-pointed star means different things in different cultural circumstances. Is a five-pointed star, for example, a pentacle or pentagram associated with the Wiccans? Well, obviously it's not, because Islam predates Wicca, so that's not the case. Is it the case that the six-pointed star associated with the flag of Israel is exclusively Jewish? No. It's literally two triangles pointing in different directions and overlaps. You could actually use that symbol in a completely different context and it'll have a completely different meaning. So if people were accustomed to, say, having a Islamic interpretation of the five-pointed star or a Jewish interpretation of the six-pointed star, and then they saw those two things next to each other, would they automatically assume that it was Islam and Judaism when it's not? Yes, they might. And the reason why they would do that is because of cultural myopia. The commonness of those symbols being associated with particular things or groups means that if there's something completely out of context, the first thing they're going to assume is about those groups, and they do so incorrectly. So just bear that in mind. If you know any stories involving five-pointed stars and six-pointed stars, just remember, it's not about Islam and it's not about Judaism, is it? It isn't even about Wicca. Okay, and we've got Star of David. It's not even about someone called David. Okay, that's not even a star. It's two triangles. Okay, it can mean two different, it mean drastically different things, drastically different people. Have a look at the suspicious symbolism on the chairs of the present King of England and Camilla Parker Bowles on their thrones. So it was noticed in a recent press release when they were delivering a speech that Charles III and Camilla Parker Bowles were sitting on thrones outside of the usual throne room that the monarchs of England are depicted in, and moreover, distinct from Queen Elizabeth II's chair or throne, was a symbol on the headrest or the back of the chair that looked very similar to the symbol on a book called Kybalion, which this body hasn't read but has heard of, which is to say a triangle with a square with a circle in it. Does that represent the King of England or present King of England and his consort Camilla Parker Bowles changing from being Anglican monarchs or theocrats that are the head of the Anglican Church to converting to a different religion called Kybalion? If the answer is yes, then we're in an interesting situation because they technically just dethroned themselves from the entirety of the British Empire by doing so. Interesting. So what does that symbol mean? And why wasn't Queen Elizabeth II using it? Right? Okay? Could mean something else completely. We don't know what it means. Could people that are familiar with the throne behaviour of the English monarchy perhaps share some ideas on that subject about why they've chosen to do that? Because that's interesting. But next step, okay? Can't assume that is the case or not. Okay, not saying it is. We're not saying that Kybalion supporters. We're just saying that's interesting. Okay. So when it comes to the pissing contest behaviour, so let's look at pissing contests. What an aristocracy or a monarchy is a type of formalised pissing contest. Look, they already got the staple and they can shit on the people whenever they like. So they don't have to act as though they're shitting on you at all. They've got a whole bunch of flying monkeys to do it for you. And so you can just deal with it. And then over the course of a couple of centuries, you get those stratas or sub-demographics within the proletariat and the lumpen proletariat that act out the imperial mindsets to show that they're jackies or lackeys for the empire in question. And so in doing so, there's sort of bully boy pissing contest behaviour where they think it's funny and that they're putting someone down or whatever, or they're interrupting or whatever they might be doing. Just shows that they're weak-willed fools who are slaves to the empire and really are holding back humanity from getting out of the abject slavery that they hate so much. So they believe in liberation, but only if it means they say something stupid once in a while and engage in narcissistic put-downs completely unnecessarily due to their enormous amounts of stupidity. Do you like that one? Okay, try and analyse that one to see how much stratification language was going on in that. Anyway, so when we get to the next step, so stratification language, next step. Okay, why Tesla Motors is going to sue Elon Musk and why that's a great thing for democracy in the USA. So the USA is in an interesting position because they've been talking about how Trump attempted an insurrection of some kind. Was it the start of 2021 or something like that? And then, of course, there's the insurrection of Elon Musk and his associates invading the OPM, allegedly with presidential support, to ransack the fucking place, resulting in the American population basically vandalizing Tesla Motors to the point where Tesla Motors lost a shit ton of money, and Musk lost his job. So the next step might be that, and likely is, that Tesla Motors sues Elon Musk for damages and loss of income due to his behaviour reasonably inciting violence in the American population. And how so? If you look at the long history of propaganda in the United States of America, they would tell you that they are the country that overthrows dictators. Never mind the installing Pinochet thing and whatever else. They overthrow dictators. They got rid of Hitler, yada, yada, yada. They've been saying that. For decades, okay? It is a point of pride for the American population that they did so. They can't stand the thought of that happening in their country or anywhere else. They're crying their eyes out about it, actually. And so that kind of reaction is what you might call a reasonable response of the American population exercising their freedom of speech. So, should Tesla Motors sue Mr. Musk and his defense be freedom of speech? The response would also be, well, actually, the American population was exercising their freedom of speech as well. Do you reasonably think that based on the information that the American population were given, shown, or experienced during that time period, would imply that that's a reasonable response? Now, if it's the American Democrat Party, it's like, actually, then how come they had posters in Europe on bus stops saying from 0 to 1939 in 3 seconds with a picture of Elon Musk's face and a Tesla motor car? Okay, that means there was international cooperation in the expression of concern and disgust at Mr. Musk's salute and the behaviour that followed. And as a consequence, it's more than just freedom of speech, okay, when he's ransacking the OPM, isn't it? It's more than just freedom of speech when people are blowing up Cybertrucks as well. And so when that case goes to court, if either of Musk argued freedom of speech, they'd both win. Both the protesters and Musk would win. And they'd both be basically the same, except the protesters would be engaging in a reasonable reaction. And at that point, they might have to argue that Musk was engaging in insurrection. And so the question is going to become, how much did Donald Trump support Elon Musk in his activities? Well, the answer is that he installed him in the first place as chief advisor, right? So Trump was complicit in that behaviour. Okay. Was it considered legal behaviour for Trump to do that? Was he following the Constitution and the proper procedures as it relates to executive orders and the appointment of cabinets and ministers and so on and so forth? Well, no, because Doji represented a government department that was not appointed by the Senate or the Congress. Apparently, the president can't do that. He can appoint advisors to his cabinet. He can have cabinet ministers. That's fine, apparently. But a brand spanking new government department like Doji, no, that requires senatorial and congressional support, and that wasn't forthcoming. And so then it suggests that Trump and Musk were acting outside the bounds of the framework of their legislative society, which would qualify as an insurrection. Okay, so this is sort of an argument that's sort of coming from the Democrats almost, right? But also some observations about what different people in America have been saying. And so, in that particular instance, it would be an amazing thing if Tesla Motors sued Elon Musk, because that would mean that the precedent that's set afterwards would be that the corporates were engaging in insurrection on labour. Capital did an insurrection on labour, not the other way around. Labour's behaviours, that quote unquote protesting in the form of vandalism, aka insurrection like behaviour, is not actually insurrection, but defensive manoeuvres against genuine attempts at insurrection caused by capital. And that would be very interesting to see indeed.